If our students aren't automatic in typing, it provides the same hurdles that if they're not automatic in their handwriting. They're still using a lot of cognitive load to either try to find the letters on their keyboard, just as they are if they're not automatic in their letter formation.
Welcome, everybody, to the Writing Glitch. I'm Cheri Dotterer, your classroom coach. Today, we have Casey Harrison. She is the owner of Wimberly Dyslexia and Learning Center. She is a certified academic language therapist, otherwise known as CALT, licensed dyslexia therapist. Her
Yeah.
blog, The Dyslexia Classroom, has opened the doors to the dyslexia community. She has partnered with Emily Gibbons and is the co-host of Together in Literacy podcast. We are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for being here, Casey.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Before we begin, let me stop and welcome our sponsor, Disability Labs. Disability Labs, we are committed to impact the journey of 200,000 teachers, which translates to about 3 million students by 2030, so they can reignite their passion for learning. Our professional learning series focuses on math and writing strategies to help all students in your classroom. These interventions improve students with and without disabilities. All students have access to the academics and writing skills. We have an ebook called The Pizza Problem available for $14.95. See the show notes for details. The Pizza Problem introduces the concept of squares to students. Whether you are a teacher, an occupational therapist, a dyslexia therapist, this math problem uses vision to develop conceptual knowledge from kindergarten through 12th grade. That will increase the complexity of the understanding of their knowledge and improve their number sense. Now, let's get on with the show. Casey, I introduced you as this owner of a dyslexia center with this license that you have. Tell us a little bit about yourself that may not be part of that.
Yes. Thank you, Cheri. I am a mom. I have twins and a little one. So I have 3 daughters, and we are very busy here on our little slice of land in Texas. We have horses and dogs and cats and chickens and all the fun things. That keeps me pretty busy. And then my professional world, yes, I have my center and I work with families and students, and I have my online branch, the Dyslexia Classroom. So busy doing all the things, but mom and wife first.
Love it. That's what we should be. We should be mom and wife before anything else. Tell me a little bit about your center. Why Wimberly?
Wimberly is where I live, and we are a little bit of a small town, and we take a lot of pride in having local businesses. When I first started, I've been in education. This is my 20. When I moved out of the classroom and into the role of dyslexia therapist, once I had my twins, I realized that while I love being in the classroom and in schools, that just wasn't going to work for what I needed. I ended up seeing students privately, and from that, my center just organically grew. The Wimberly Dyslexia and Learning Center really is a collective of professionals that come together that are very passionate about helping students meet their potential. We address dyslexia therapy, we provide academic language support, speech therapy, as well as focusing on the whole child and making sure that we're addressing, yes, the academic components, but also the emotional well-being.
Girl after my own heart, working on that emotional well-being. And I believe you and I met through Emily,
Mhm.
through the program that she runs. And then we were actually met in person when I was in Texas last year,
We did, yeah.
which was fun. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with the dyslexia classroom and Together in Literacy, that branch of your life.
Yes, as I'm a big proponent of always lifelong learning, and I'm willing to pivot and jump into new things. The dyslexia classroom came about because I was having more and more people reach out in communities beyond my local one, and I wanted to be able to connect and share both resources and just information in the world of dyslexia. It can be overwhelming, I think, for teachers, but also for families as they enter this. And I wanted people to know that they're not alone in that journey. From my personal side, my family, my youngest sister had learning disabilities. So I witnessed this growing up as far as what happens with the family and their journey and just meeting the needs of students that have differences. And I knew that was something that I wanted to connect with and help people understand that they're not alone and just be there as a support system. So that's how the dyslexia classroom came about. And it's just morphed into courses and blogs.
Amazing. And that's the same journey that I had is I wanted to reach out beyond my local community and talk to people about what dysgraphia was. And I'm learning more and more every day about the differences between the dyslexia and the dysgraphia. There's a lot of overlap that happens. What are some of the techniques and the strategies that you use to help kids get from the reading to get it down on paper?
That is such a great question. There is a lot of overlap. While we have characteristics of dyslexia and we have the characteristics of dysgraphia, and they are unique in and of themselves, there is a great deal of overlap. Because of that, I think that anyone that is working with students needs to have some level of awareness of how dysgraphia can impact the students' work. From the start, I think we can look at writing in and of itself is such a huge task and it requires so much cognitive energy, right? There's a lot that's happening when we're asking students to write. And I think sometimes we may forget a lot of those prerequisite skills that are necessary. And we just put a paper in front of children and ask them, tell us about your weekend, and expect them to be able to do that without pausing for a moment and thinking all that goes into that. When we're thinking about writing, we have to think first and foremost about language and understanding, can the student express their words in a way that is communicating a message? When we're linking that to reading and writing, we also have to understand that students need to be able to write legibly, and that needs to be done at an automatic level. For me, I want to instill in my students that connection between the phonics and the written piece in a way that empowers them so they can think about the messaging. If students are able to have their handwriting be automatic letter formation at that reasonable legibility and speed, then we can shift their concentration more on spelling and then on the message, which is what we want writing ultimately to be, right?
Listeners, writing has three components. We have the biomechanical component. That is what is going on from that sensory, motor, and memory standpoints. How are we forming letters and those basic foundations that you don't even think about because they are not academic? Then we have the language level that Casey just referred to. Then we have the cognitive level. Each one of these levels is like they're on this hierarchy. Yet, if we don't have one of them working, they don't work together at all. What happens on a day-to-day basis with a child can make or break what they're doing in the classroom. If they had something happen at home before they left or overnight, yeah, they're not going to perform in the classroom. They're also not going to perform for the tutoring sessions. It really does make a difference if those three foundational categories are not in sync that day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true.
Uh, so do you have an intervention that you use to guide the students in from the spelling into the writing process? Do you have one that you'd like to share?
I would say that being really intentional in the work that we do and creating linkages or embedding the writing within your dyslexia lesson or within your reading, my students will start and will warm up with writing the alphabet. Or we may review some of the letter formations either in sand or on a vertical surface. Um, or even on paper, just giving them different options to work on different motor muscles. Once I've introduced a sound, then we're going to directly link that in handwriting practice to the written form. So if we've learned digraph CK, then that's what they're going to practice is digraph CK, and they're going to be writing those letters. I do a lot of cursive in my dyslexia work, working on not just the approach strokes, but how do we form those letters and how do we make those connections as we're writing. When we can explicitly teach the letter formation linked with the sound representation and the letter representation or the grapheme, we're helping the students store that in their brain language center. We want to have that be practiced to automaticity. The other place within that lesson, we'll have the students practice writing words that utilize that concept of the day. Then we will have our spelling deck where I will say a sound and the student echoes the sound and then they write the letter. Then we move into the spellings. There's a lot of writing that's embedded throughout our lessons in intentional ways. As my students progress and we move into connected text, that's where I will have them work on developing writing in terms of written expression. From there, we may read something and then they're going to either create a graphic organizer if they're just on the word level written expression, or if we're able to transition that into writing sentences. And then our ultimate goal is working into compositions. Everything gradually builds upon prerequisite skills, but it's done in a very intentional way.
When you were talking about CK, the word that came to my brain was brick.
Mm.
Because of the way the cursive word is, the B ending at the top connected to R, which is one of the hardest connections. Any tow truck letter to R is difficult. Are you doing any bilateral connections to writing? I think you and I've talked about how interlaced bilateral integration helps the students. Are you doing anything using both sides of the brain while you're working with the students?
Sometimes I do. It just depends on the student. Those bridging linkages between the letters is so important. A lot of times when I see either programs or implementation of handwriting practice, the letters are all done in isolation and then they jump right to writing words. There's a disconnect. We're not setting the stage for success because we're not helping students understand how to connect those letters. We have to be mindful of in our lessons. Are we helping students with those connections, especially in cursive, as we move forward?
Every handwriting program that I run into has a successful, systematic, and explicit program. They have the multisensory. I've been looking at that cumulative, and you just hit the nail on the head right there with what you said. The cumulative part is where you're starting to connect the reading, the writing, so that it does make sense to the kids. One of the techniques that I've been using when I've been working with cursive is I start with the last letter of the word and work backwards and get the student to be accustomed to the last letter. Many times I'm just working on their name, but let's use the word brick, for instance. We start with a K, make sure they understand how to do it. Then we do the CK and we keep going back. Fortunately, that leaves us with the BR combination as the last group to conquer. Everything else is easier because they all start on the baseline. I hope this gives you some ideas of things that you can do with your students. Working with that bilateral integration and sometimes working backwards are beneficial for the students and help with those connections.
In decoding, we have a strategy called backwards blending. It's a little bit similar to what you're talking about, where we were trying to read the word brick. What I would do is cover up the B and the R, and we would read from ick and then rick to brick. What you're saying is we would practice the K, then move into the CK so that we're starting to work on just that repetitive manner to build that muscle memory and that graphomotor connection for development of those letters and sequences. That also is something to note is how many opportunities for practice are we providing students? Sometimes maybe we're not providing enough to create that muscle memory, which is needed to build into that automaticity. Yesterday we learned K, today we're learning this letter. If we haven't provided enough practice for that, it becomes very disjointed. Another thing that I work on is approach strokes and making sure that I have really concise language for each of those strokes. as the students are writing, I'm giving them those verbal cues for how to form the letters, whether it's in print or in cursive. The reason why I do that, Sherry, is because when my students will then look at me later and they know the letter that they're trying to recall in their mind's eye, but they're stuck on the formation, I can cue them with that verbal cue, oh, swing up, stop. And they're like, oh, yeah. And it cues them into that correction versus not having that system set up. Being concise in the language that we're using, and then knowing that can be used as an error correction or a support as you're gradually releasing them to automaticity.
Absolutely. And back up to brick a little bit when I am been talking about the bilateral. Air writing is so essential.
Yes.
One of the things about air writing is I like to do it this way. So B
Yeah, we talked about that.
R I C K. And one of the reasons I do that with the students is because it gets both sides of the brain working together. You can work on the logic, you can work on the creativity and pull them together while you are learning the word. We have so many kids who right brain is so much more developed when they enter school than their left brain because they when up to kindergarten they've been exploring their world. Their right brain is much more developed. We get into kindergarten and expect this brain that has not gotten as much development, the logic side of the brain, the left side, to work. I think about it a lot because I'm left-handed in a
Mhm.
right-handed world. People think logically. And I often think, what are ways to get both sides of the brain together? I keep dwelling on that in this podcast because I want listeners to hear that over and over again, that getting both sides of the brain working together is going to improve the retention and the learning of whatever it is, if it's just reading, if it's just writing, or if it's a combination of both. Sorry if I took over, but I really want to stress that bilateral is so crucial.
Yeah, and that air writing is awesome. If you're a teacher, what you wanna do is you can put the letter large on the board, and you can use that language as you're having them do the air writing, and they're standing back enough where they can use what's on the board as that form to follow as you guide them through the letter formation with that language cue. So, there's a lot of things happening all at the same time.
Sure is. If you are air writing, you're actually teaching the muscles in your shoulder, wrist, elbow, and fingers the way to write that letter. Keep that in mind that air writing is reinforcing the muscle memory, but you also have to keep your hands away from you. If you're writing with your fingers, that's one thing. But if you put your hands together, you're defeating the whole purpose. Never put your palms together. Always put your palms away from you. When you're air writing, that's what's going to teach your shoulders what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, bringing those gross motor skills all the way down to the fine motor skills. When we hear handwriting, we jump right into the pincer grasp and focusing on that. Sometimes you have to pause and take a step back and look at your student's position and how they're holding their body. And do they have the core muscle or are they over or can they not sit up in their chair or do they maybe need to work more on vertical surfaces? There's a lot that you can step back and analyze. I'm not an OT, that's not my area of specialty, but there are things that I definitely look for even in my world where I'm working with students. Yes, of course, I'm looking at the fine motor dexterity piece and the pincer grasp, but I'm also looking beyond that too. How are they holding their body? Are they able to sit in their chair? What is their handwriting position? Have you ever had to sit in a conference and you're in an uncomfortable chair and you're trying to take notes and your notes are sloppy or you're having a hard time? That can be a struggle for us as adults. I reflect on that with my students when I'm asking them to sit. Am I providing them the proper seating to provide that comfort for writing? Is the chair the right height? Is the table the right height? Are they able to have their back so that they have some support so that they're sitting in that 90 degree position? There's a lot that we can reflect on in terms of environment that we're setting up for students within our reading lessons when we're asking them to write.
They don't have to be seated to write. They could be
That's
laying
just
on the floor. Sometimes 90-90-90 isn't the way to go. Sometimes it is the beanbag chair.
mhm,
Sometimes it is laying on the floor. But when they are sitting, 90-90-90 is the best place to be.
yeah, absolutely. For
Yeah.
some of our kiddos with weak core muscle, I find that the floor is a good spot for them. Another thing that I look at is what is our dominant hand doing versus our non-dominant hand? Are we using that non-dominant hand to stabilize the paper? Sometimes my kids will have their hand down to their side or over their head. And then instead of moving the paper, they end up with their arm all in a very uncomfortable position, having them understand what that non-dominant hand does and the angle of the paper to help them, also having that awareness on how do we make adjustments for right-handed and left-handed student when addressing paper, because that tilt is a little bit different.
You want the paper tilted towards the right. For right-handed, you want it tilted towards the left. One thing I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about what you do, where your center is, how you reach out to the community at large. You have this podcast with Emily. What are you focusing on in that podcast?
That's a great question. Emily Gibbons is from the Literacy Nest, and I'm from the Dyslexia Classroom. We are entering our fourth year of our podcast, which is called Together in Literacy. Our focus is talking about dyslexia, focusing on the emotional well being of our students, coming at through the lens of a more holistic approach in terms of addressing, yes, the academic components, but also understanding the child that's sitting in front of us and what that means. We talk about lots of different topics that have to do with the world that we work in. We've talked about math and dyslexia. We've talked about some of the social emotional impacts, anxiety, classroom environment, talking about the science of learning, and then all the elements within the Orton Gillingham principles and structured literacy elements. So, just there's a lot of different topics that we cover, but all under that umbrella of dyslexia.
I wanted people to hear a little bit more about your podcast because I believe that they could listen to yours as well as the Writing Glitch. Before we close today, is there anything else burning in your heart that you'd like to share with the audience as we blend reading and writing and activities and interventions?
It's a great question. I want people to understand how integrated reading and writing really are. The more we can intentionally embed the two and intentionally help students make that connection between what they're reading and what they're writing from all these different levels, that we're empowering our students. When we don't spend the time developing automaticity in handwriting, when we don't spend the time even typing, we didn't even talk about that, but a lot of times in the dyslexia world, one of the accommodations is that students are provided with a computer. If our students aren't automatic in typing, it provides the same hurdles that if they're not automatic in their handwriting. They're still using a lot of cognitive load to either try to find the letters on their keyboard, just as they are if they're not automatic in their letter formation. Their cognitive load ends up being try to remember the letter formation. The keyboarding has to be automatic for it to be a useful tool. And yes, we use speech to text a lot, but you still have to go in and edit and you still have to go in and do some typing. With my older students, I do embed typing as part of our reading practice to provide them with that. Typing is something that for parents, they're always asking, what can we do at home? There's some great typing programs out there that are free and paid for that can provide students with enough practice to become automatic. We really want them about 20 words a minute for
Mhm.
typing. People also ask about pencil grips. Some students like them, some students don't. You also have to notice which student needs what. And I always encourage people that are working with students with dyslexia and dysgraphia, because there tends to be a little bit of an overlap, to dig into. You can look at Cheri's book or look at some different resources just to become more knowledgeable about how to help students that may need a little bit more support.
How can people get a hold of you? I know we've talked about it, but we really didn't talk about your website.
The best way to find me is at thedyslexiaclassroom.com, and all my stuff is there. I'm also under that handle on all socials.
You always are filled with wisdom. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. It was an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you,
And this has
Cheri.
been Casey Harrison with the Dyslexia Classroom here with Cheri Dotterer from the Writing Glitch. Listeners, you were put here for such a time as this. Go be awesome. Go be brilliant. Have a wonderful week.